Hi, so this is video 3. I'm obviously having a video talking day today. So I just wanted to talk about cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is when we have our values here, what matters to us, but then our actions and the way we live are here. And so they're not lined up, they're different. And that causes discomfort. So if you think about the most basic one of those is when you're lying and you know you're lying. So when you know what the truth is, you're saying something that's not true, and there's always a tension, isn't there? A kind of, I don't know whether you can feel it in your body or you feel a bit sick or discomfort because you're not lining up. It's Festinger's idea of cognitive dissonance. So that's maybe the most simple, but then we also, for me, when I was doing my teacher training, no, I was a teacher, I was a form tutor, and I remember standing in front of a tutor group that I stayed with a long time and still am in touch with, and I sobbed when I left them. I remember doing a lesson with them on the dangers of smoking. So here I am talking about the dangers of smoking whilst knowing that in the pubs at the weekend I was smoking. And it was really, I felt such a fraud standing in front of them. And so that was the last time I ever had a cigarette, because this discomfort was too great. So I lined myself up. And so what we do with cognitive dissonance is we have to somehow line up. And so we can do that in one of two ways. So when the smoking story that I've just told you, I changed my behavior. That was my son just coming out. I changed my behavior to line up with my beliefs. Another way to do it is where we make a cognitive shift. So we change our beliefs to justify our behavior. So I'm going to give you an example of that, which makes me cringe. So I am very concerned about the environmental crisis. I'm fully aware of the impacts of flying. And even though airlines are saying that they're carbon offsetting, I know that we shouldn't be flying. So there's my beliefs. I fundamentally believe that we need to, it's not a belief. I've read the science. There's nothing that convinces me that driving a lot and flying a lot is good for the future of, my children as they get older, and if they have children, nothing. So it's not just a belief. I know that. I've read and listened, and then I flew. Oh, I know. And so that feeling that I'm just doing in my body is I feel ashamed. I feel ashamed. It feels hard to tell you that because I'm out of line. So I judge myself. No matter, you can judge me, but actually the hardest thing is I'm judging me. And that's so uncomfortable. So what is easy to do then is to justify and go, oh, well, it doesn't matter because the airline was offsetting. It said so on the seats. It said this is carbon offset. Or I could justify by going, no, well, I haven't flown for 3 years. Or, oh, it wasn't very far. Or, well, everybody else is doing it. Or, as somebody said, the aeroplane would have been going to whether you were in it or not. So they're all rationalizations. And that's another way that we lessen cognitive dissonance, because then if I were able to really believe that, then I'm back in line again. And that reduces that sense of shame. So when we come to things like, if you take, so I think I will go there. I was just thinking about the Holocaust. So we've got, this is, and I'm speaking as the daughter of people who died in Auschwitz. Not the daughter, great-granddaughter. So I'm sure there would have been, I don't believe the people that did that were born evil. But what happened was what they did, their behaviors were probably very much out of line with their upbringing. You know, I don't believe that most of the people that committed those atrocities, I'm sure some were brought up with those kind of violent tendencies, but most of them were just normal people who were brought up to, you know, be nice to their brother and sister and the pet, but they ended up doing atrocious things. Now, what happened, and you can look at Milgram's research, which is about how we give away our power to authority and we get incrementally controlled. And of course, they would have been scared for their own life to stand up and say, no, I'm not doing that. But also, agentic control is when we can say somebody made us do it. I was just following orders. And what that is it takes our, so here's a normal person with nice upbringing who ends up pushing people into gas chambers over here, the behavior. And so that sense of I had to do it, I was following orders, is a way of aligning to it's a kind of cognitive trick that we have to do in order to line ourselves up. So what does that mean? Why are we talking about this? Well, I suppose I was talking this morning about trying to design a life that sits with your attitudes and your values and is good for you and your well-being, but also for the wider world and future generations and nature. And so that's why I gave you that example of the aeroplane. And because cognitive dissonance either demands that we change our behavior, or we have to change our thinking to justify a behavior that we're not comfortable with. I think that's one of the real reasons, isn't it? You know, that we're not engaging and making the changes that we need to do to lower carbon emissions and increase, you know, our recycling and our solar panels and reduce our consumerism. Because the more we want and the more we have, the more that we're producing. Even if we're not producing it in this country, we're producing it in places like China, so they get the emissions and we don't, but actually we're the consumers because we're part, you know, there is no elsewhere. We've just got this one planet. And I think cognitive dissonance stops us. So what could happen, if I go back to the example of the aeroplane, what could happen here is I know that it's wrong. I've flown. So I can either go, oh, it doesn't really matter. There's nothing I can do. Everybody else was flying anyway. Or I can stop flying completely, which I didn't do on this occasion. And what that can do, that sense of shame there, the difference is that we then go into either paralysis or we go into a denial about, well, it's not really that serious. There's nothing I can do. It doesn't really make a difference. And so that then might encourage more flying because, well, I've done it once. So I might as well do it again. Nothing bad happened. Because of course we can't see the threat. It's not a visible threat, a bit like COVID. We couldn't see COVID. And so then that sense of shame means that we then line up our thinking to go, oh, it doesn't really matter, there's nothing I can do, it's not here now, which then means that all the other things that we could do, we don't do. So it would be very easy to think, well, what's the point of recycling because I flew? Or what's the point of, I'm looking at getting solar panels. What's, you know, you hypocrite, Julie, because you're looking at solar panels and yet you flew. And here's the thing, I think the most difficult thing to do with cognitive dissonance is to live with it, to think I sometimes do things which are out of line with my values, and I really try not to. And that doesn't mean that there aren't other things that I can do that are in line. So, you know, recycling and I can hear the judge in my head going, oh yeah, but recycling is nothing compared to the damage you did by flying. And that's where we need compassion for ourselves to say, listen, you know, I get why you flew and you can recycle and you can look at solar. And so it's living with this tension and being able to talk about it to each other so that we don't go into a paralysis or a denial that there's nothing that we can do, because the way the brain works is that we're primed to respond to immediate threat. It's kind of an acute stressor. And so, you know, if somebody cuts me up on the road, my body's immediately going to try and slam on the brakes and take avertive action, because it's real, it's immediate, we can perceive the threat to our life. But we saw with COVID that because it was an invisible threat, there were certain sections of the population who, you know, either took longer to accept that it was in the environment, or just never did accept that it was in the environment. And some of that was, that denial was almost a self-protective strategy, because people, so I work in education, teachers had to be in schools. And so when the government was saying, oh no, it's safe in schools, which I thought was a bit like that, you know, when you watch Harry Potter and they have that big shield to keep the Dementors out, it was like, what, do we think that there's that shield over schools that mean the virus can't get in? And so there was this narrative from the government about, which was a form of denial, that no, you know, schools are safe, kids don't get ill. No, kids don't get ill, but many, many teachers did get ill. And so it makes me smile every time I listen to the news and they say, oh, the over 50s have left the workplace during the pandemic and we want to get them back. And I think, of course they left the workplace, and they probably are not coming back, because there was no honesty about it. Instead of holding on to this tension and saying, there is a threat to you in schools, we're going to do everything we can to mitigate it, we're not going to pretend it isn't there, and we're asking you to do something really difficult. That didn't happen, because that's much more complex. But instead to go, oh, it's safe, that's the cognitive denial, which then really caused so much stress, because of course everybody knew that it wasn't safe and that it was spreading, and that it would spread. It was entirely predictable that that would happen. And so living with that, and knowing that, learning from the pandemic that not all threats are visible, and climate change can feel like it's happening elsewhere, and whether that elsewhere is another place in the world or another time. So we might look at Australia and the fires there, or we might read about the Arctic melting, or we might, when we look at the data and they're saying, you know, about the decline of species and air quality and sea quality in 2050, that's, none of that feels immediate. We're not in Australia, we're not in 2050. So those little other threats in our life, you know, I've got bills to pay, children to feed, work to do, those immediate threats take our attention and leads us to be, we miss that bigger picture. And that's, again, kind of locked into our system, because we have a system where we vote for politicians once every 4 years. And so thinking tends to be, you know, what's going to happen in the next 4 years, and basically that's what am I going to do to stay in power individually. So there is no, go back to the net, there's no network of, well, how do my actions impact upon others and future generations, and how, okay, I might be all right, but if not everybody's all right, that's going to have an impact on me in some way. And so what do we do about that? What do we do about the fact that we can't see this threat, that it feels away, either in time or in place? Well, so first of all is to name it and to recognize that, you know, fires in Australia are releasing, you know, the trees burning are releasing carbon dioxide into the air, which goes into the air that we all breathe. you know, the acidification of the ocean. Okay, I don't live by the sea, doesn't matter to me, but do eat fish. I do want to swim in the sea. So as soon as we start to see how we're connected to all of that, and how it will all affect us. So already, even before the Ukraine, we were seeing immigration, and some of that's to do with war and politics, but increasingly we will see migration of people from the global south because it's going to be too hot. So at the moment in India, temperatures are at 45, 50. So that's an intolerable, you know, I couldn't live in that. And so again, why would we be surprised if people from those countries that can leave those countries do leave those countries? Why would that surprise us? Because again, we'd probably all do the same if we had to do that for our kids and our safety. And so that will have an impact on us. You know, there will be increased migration, and there is increased migration. So it's that thing about it is happening now and it is affecting us. So when there's glaciers melting in the Arctic, that's causing sea levels to rise right now. When there's forest burning, that's releasing CO2 right now. When we're spreading Nutella on our bread that's made of palm oil, that's leading to deforestation in the Amazon right now. And we know how many of our cures and our medicines come from those places, and they might be the medicines that one of your loved ones needs for their cure for cancer, or their cure, you know, something that will improve heart disease or Alzheimer's. So it is happening now, and it is happening here. And we need to have those conversations increasingly, holding that tension between, okay, so it is happening now, it is happening here, it is invisible. There are other things that are really urgent and they can derail us, but actually, and I can't be perfect. I think that's part of the cognitive dissonance, is I am not perfect. None of us can be. Some people, you know, I was listening to a podcast where there's a guy who's just living off grid completely with no technology. So he's literally water from a well, and he's not got a phone. He's, you know, he's planting and he's making and he's exchanging for what he needs. Not many of us are going to be able to do that, but that doesn't mean we can't do something, and that we can't do what we can do. So, and often it's not they're not big things, it's actually very simple things. So going back to the previous two videos about looking away from the linear acquisition of more, but looking at diversification and different types of wealth, social wealth, health wealth, connectivity, time in nature, those kind of wealths, actually they don't mean that we're buying more stuff, which means we don't need to earn as much money, which means we don't have to drive our cars as much. It means that if we step out of that story of more and start to understand what is enough. So, you know, have I got enough stuff? Yes. You know, is my sofa brand new? No, but is it a good enough sofa? Yes. And that can spread from, hey, have we got enough food? Do we really need to buy all of that food? You know, Christmas is the classic, isn't it? How much did you throw away at Christmas? How much food did you throw away because you had more than enough? And if you think about everything that you threw away was probably packaged in plastic, would have taken months, if not a year, to grow and produce, will have used water, will have used soil, and you just put it in the bin because we're not very good at knowing what is enough is enough. And that's because, of course, the whole industry of advertising and marketing is wanting to sell you more. And I think the most radical act that is good for us and our well-being, for our relationships, and for the planet is to say, actually, I am enough. I'm not perfect. I get things wrong. I do things that are out of line with my value. but I'm really trying to be the best, and I'm enough. I don't need to spend more on Botox or false nails, because actually I'm enough, and the people who really get me and love me will appreciate that. So understanding that I am enough, that I have enough, and not everybody does have enough. Some people don't have enough food, don't have safe shelter, don't have clean water. Now they're the ones who haven't got enough, and they're the ones that are paying the highest prices for our need for more. And so actually giving up some of our, and knowing that we've got enough, means that we can start to share our resources. So again, the COVID vaccines, we were vaccinating our young people who were unlikely to get really, really ill, when there were parts of the global south who hadn't had vaccines at all. And that's a good example of how we didn't know when we had enough coverage, when we'd looked after ourselves enough, and so therefore had stuff to give away. So I don't think we can look to politicians for this stuff. I think they're decisions that we have to make. And the next video will be on the power of the individual. So I think that knowing when enough is enough and acting upon that leads you to feel better, because you haven't overeaten, you haven't overspent, you haven't overexercised, or you kept within your limits. And you keeping within your limits means that you've got more of your life back, because you don't need as much money, you don't need all that stuff that you thought that the advertiser had told you need. You just don't need it. And actually, so maybe you don't need to work so hard, so maybe you can spend time with people that you love, or doing things that you love, which means your well-being's better. And because you're extracting less and needing less, then actually that's better for the environment too. So this kind of, I suppose it's applying psychology to stuff that we do every day. So just noticing when we're feeling dissonant, when we've done something that's out of line with our values and our intention, and rather than then kind of slipping into denial or blame or minimization, to just actually acknowledge that tension, to think about it, to kind of think about how you want to deal with that next time, and then to really engage with thinking about what matters to you, rather than what the story wants you to think about. Okay, I think that's probably enough there. And to the next one. Take care.